Hi, everybody. Some of you don't know me, so don't take a photo of me and don't. That's like, I don't know what happens to you when that happens, but bad shit happens. So, and I know everybody loves camera phones, especially in California. Um, yeah, I was gonna start off by saying I'm in California, and my friends have told me to be on my best behavior. Um, and I'm trying really, really hard, but it's so hard because I have a lot of feelings about California. When I was looking at colleges as a kid, I came out here. I went to visit Berkeley, and I'm from New York, and I'm a concrete princess. And I was like, oh, hell no. There were so many white people, and there were lots of trees. And I knew this wasn't going to be the place for me. Well, anyway, good afternoon, everybody. Um, Thanks to the Center for the Study of Women for inviting me here. As mentioned, I rarely come to the West Coast, and it's really a testament of how highly I think of Grace and Sarah and Rachel and others that I made the trip. I also fell about 10 days ago and busted my knee. So it was not a fun trip to get here. But once I came and I saw these comrades and friends of mine of long standing, and since again, I really try to avoid the West Coast, especially California, especially the Bay. And since all those things were true, it tells you how much I love you that I showed up. I'm also a huge fan and admirer of course, of my co-people who are going to be here, Mimi and Emily. And I felt some kind of way about being here, like opening. It was like some weird, Mariame, Kaba and the Supreme situation. And it really is nothing like that because I've learned everything I know from these other folks who are going to be on the panel speaking. It's ridiculous. But I'm happy to get to share this space with all of you. And again, thanks for coming out to everybody who's here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about kind of being exiled from and in exile from the traditional anti-rape and anti-domestic violence movement. Talk a little bit about how that came to be and how I came to do the work that I do that all of us will talk more about in a few minutes. But I got involved in anti-rape organizing in 1989 when I was in college. I know. I look much younger than that. But yeah, it was 89. But anyway, and I had tried to get involved before then as a high school student, but I was turned away at the time from working at a rape crisis center. That's a story for another day. After college, I continued to volunteer and then work at rape crisis centers and domestic violence organizations. By then, which is the late 80s, the anti-violence against women and girls movement, which was what it was termed at the time, which is now more broadly termed the anti-gender-based violence movement, was already well on its way to becoming a professionalized field. Professionalization eroded peer-to-peer support models, which involved survivors and victims helping other survivors through support groups and counseling. It pressured people to identify as experts and discouraged community members from taking leadership within the work. It pushed survivors of violence out of the field, claiming that they were still in quote unquote crisis and shouldn't be leaders. And it removed organizing as a path to healing. It's important to remember, though, that the anti-rape movement of the early 1970s emerged out of a radical women's movement that was suspicious, actually, of relying too heavily on the state to address its concerns. Early grassroots rape crisis centers explicitly operated outside of the social service paradigm, and they focused a lot on mutual aid, right? They did not mainly rely on law enforcement and the courts, in part because law enforcement and the courts were not responsive. So some feminists of that period of time, mostly socialist, lesbian, radical feminists, were very much saying accepting money from the state would make the movement beholden to the state's interests. When I entered the field, we were already far removed from those origins of the modern movement of the 1970s, and we were continuing at that point to move further astray. Today, the anti-violence field is replete with well-meaning therapists and social workers and advocates who have come to this work with a social service orientation. Andrea Smith, feminist scholar activist, provides some context for this. And she writes, for the anti-violence movement, the shift towards bureaucratization coincided with the influx of federal and state dollars into anti-violence programs, particularly with the Violence Against Women's Act. Anti-violence groups then began to shift their focus from anti-violence organizing to anti-violence support services. With restrictions that federal monies often place on the type of work anti-violence groups can do, their work became state-friendly, such as calling for increased criminalization of domestic and sexual violence rather than state-resistant, such as violence prevention initiatives and alternatives to incarceration. So I'm now entering my 31st year of working in this area as an activist, an advocate, organizer, and worker. And really, as I mentioned at the beginning, consider myself pretty much an exile of the funded anti-rape and anti-domestic violence fields. From my position of exile, I'm committed to reclaiming a model that for addressing harm that does not rely on the punishing state as the first resort to mete out so-called justice. In that, I'm part of a lineage of Mimi and Elisa and Emily and all sorts of other people in this room, a lineage of anti-prison feminists who challenged the idea that policing and prisons were the solution to interpersonal violence. In the words of Susan Sachs, who was a political prisoner in the 1970s, my feminism does not drive me into the arms of the state, but even further from it. Early on, the anti-rape and anti-domestic violence movements were actually riddled with internal tensions between those folks who were worried that the movements would be co-opted by the state and those who deeply believed that the state needed to be responsive to the demands of penal punishment. In 1977, feminists from the Santa Cruz Women Against Rape wrote an open letter published in Off Our Backs and circulated among thousands of activists across the country. It opened with these words: "This is an open letter to the anti-rape movement. We, the members of the Santa Cruz Women Against Rape, are writing this letter because we are concerned about the direction of the anti-rape movement is taking. While we have many concerns, some of which are expressed in this letter, we would primarily like to address the issue of the relationship of the anti-rape movement to the criminal justice system. The reasons we are interested in this issue have a lot to do with how we see ourselves as a Women Against Rape group. We are a political group that focuses on the issue of rape and violence against women, and that is working towards the long-range goal of a radical transformation of the very basis of our society. We do not believe that rape can end within the present capitalist, racist, and sexist structure of our society. The fight against rape must be waged simultaneously with the fight against all forms of oppression. When the organized movement against rape first started about 5 years ago, most of the anti-rape groups were collectives of feminists who came together because of their anger at the way the police and the courts treated rape victims. These groups, and ours was among them, were primarily political. We were critics of the police, courts, and the hospitals, the institutions that traditionally dealt with rape victims. Their awful treatment of women became a topic in the media, largely due to the efforts of the women's movement against rape. In a snowball fashion, many other anti-rape groups formed. Many of these groups, however, did not consider themselves political or even feminist. They considered themselves service groups who wanted to, quote, help rape victims. They felt that the criminal justice system and the anti-rape movement had a common cause: to get rapists off the streets. Therefore, these groups tended to encourage or cajole women to report to the police. The more explicitly political groups were frustrated, both by the ineffectiveness and unresponsiveness of the criminal justice system, and because of the increasing rape rate. While many remained critical of the criminal justice system, in theory, most groups felt it was important to work on building or improving relationships with the police and other criminal justice agencies. They hoped that this would lead to increased prosecution and conviction of rapists. In attempts by anti-rape groups to build good relations with the criminal justice system, criticism of these agencies has been withheld or dealt with through police channels, instead of by applying outside pressure, e.g. through media, demonstrations, etc. This tendency to work with the criminal justice system is reinforced by the fact that many groups are supported through government funds. Because of this, there is an inevitable push, if not outright contractual obligation, to persuade women to report rapes to the police. So, despite these concerns, carceral feminists won the day. The anti-rape and anti-domestic violence fields were incredibly successful at passing laws and at creating new categories of crime. The focus on getting the police to become more responsive to these instances of violence led to a symbiotic relationship between anti-rape advocates and law enforcement, a relationship which actually endangers and criminalizes particular survivors. In addition, professionalization itself serves to delegitimize and erase the voices of those in the field who are trying to resist carceral interventions as the main solution to ending gender-based violence. The collaboration between these fields and the police have been destructive for the safety of many survivors of violence. Many survivors regularly tell me that they do not actually want to involve the police and the courts in their lives. They simply want the violence to end. This is not unusual, and it is belied by the fact that fewer than half of the people who are victims of crime at all ever call the police. Most people prefer nothing as opposed to the current criminal punishment system. That's a real indictment of this current system, that so many people choose nothing as opposed to what is currently on offer. The reality is that most victims of sexual assault do not turn to the criminal punishment system in the first place, and most rapists will not go to prison. Out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 230, I think I'm going to skip ahead. So yeah, out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 230 are reported to law enforcement, 46 lead to arrest, 9 get referred to prosecutors, 5 lead to a felony conviction, and fewer than 5 will actually ever lead to incarceration. So if the goal is to end rape through the criminal legal process, then I would say that based on the numbers that we just went through, that strategy has already failed, right? Like, I don't understand what we're talking about when people are talking about the current system. It's already proven not to be effective for either survivors or the people who caused harm. So I just don't get what the big issue is. Like, what are we talking about? I'll get to that in a minute. I first read the open letter from Santa Cruz Women Against Rape in the mid-90s. And it was really a balm to me because I was like, actually, I'm not insane. Like, I'm in this space right now and people were already 20 years ahead of that talking about the problem, right? They already, at the very beginning of the institutionalized kind of wave of kind of, anti-gender based thought, people were already writing like, this is bullshit. So I was like, oh, okay, this is amazing. Thank you. I was already becoming disenchanted with the funded anti-violence, anti-gender based violence field. The survivors I was working with were consistently rejecting what we were offering, which was mainly legal solutions. That open letter sent me down a rabbit hole to learn more about the actual history of the anti-rape and anti-domestic violence organizing that had predated the 70s and goes as far back as Ida B. Wells Barnett and Maria Stewart and other Black women who had been talking about rape and sexual violence from the era of slavery beyond. And so I started really learning that at every point in history, ideas were actually contested. And what was happening is that one side won and the other side lost. And that history didn't actually play out as a series of waves, but rather as contests and fights. That helped me quite a great deal about conceptualizing what history looked like as an organizer, right? That we had to fight all the time. And that some of us won at some points and some of us lost at other points. But it's not true that no one's ever talking about X, Y, Z. That's actual bullshit. And that usually has to do with people who don't actually do anything who wouldn't know, right? Like, it's like, how would you know that? No, like, you're not doing anything, so of course nobody's doing anything in your life, right? But people are always doing things. You just aren't there. Because the sun doesn't revolve around us, right? Like, it's really important to get out of that mind frame. So currently in this Me Too moment, there's this renewed interest in sexual violence by some members of the public. And I, for one, I welcome that interest. It's important, however, that we learn from the past in order to avoid past mistakes. We are not going to end rape through criminalization. It's just not going to happen. The women of the Santa Cruz Women Against Rape warned us of this in 1977. We do not need to keep going down the same exact failed path. So my own open letter to the anti-rape movement, written in 2020, would point out that prisons and police abuse and violate people by design. By design. It is not an accident that this is happening. And if you keep proposing the same goddamn solutions, you're going to get the same exact responses. You're going to get the same outcomes. Yeah? So they're dynamic in terms of policing in prison. They mirror actually interpersonal, domestic, and sexual violence. And people like Colby and Elisa and others have written and thought and theorized that. So has Mimi, so have a lot of other people. So it's a feature, not a bug. You know, the prison in particular is, as law professor and activist Dean Spade contends, a serial rapist itself, right? So you're not going to end rape by rape. None of this makes any sense to me. I'm just sorry. Like, I constantly am like, I don't know where I'm living, but like, it's not here. Because it doesn't make sense. When we sentence people to prison, we're essentially sentencing them to judicial rape. Because we know what's going to happen to so many people who are inside. So you're an anti-rape activist and you're pro-prison, it makes no sense. The cognitive dissonance is too high. Okay? You can't do it. You can't square that fucking circle. Yeah, all right. So criminalization is inherently sexual violence. It isn't simply co-constitutive of sexual violence. It is actually state enactment of gender violence. And if you don't believe me, then think of the routine strip searches that take place in carceral spaces every day, that the people who are just visiting are subjected to, let alone the people who are on the inside. Incarcerated people are, of course, subjected to these, but so too are the people who, again, visit them. Cavity searches of people driving their own cars is a regular practice of policing. Sexual violation of pat-downs during stop and frisk are routine. In addition, by rigidly enforcing the gender binary, prisons isolate, they punish, and they target people who do not conform to existing norms of gender expression and presentation. Yeah? So in short, prisons and jails routinely deploy and maintain gendered violence. Criminalization reproduces and maintains gender-based violence. Again, we're not going to be able to use this to actually solve the problem. How much time do I have left? I have 5 minutes. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. So here's what I want to say. I want to say that prison is not feminist. I want to say that oppression and domination are main features of the prison industrial complex. I want to say in Charlotte Bunch's terminology, as she suggests, that feminism as a political perspective is about changing structures, about ending domination, about resisting oppression. By this definition, prisons, of course, cannot be feminist. Yeah? If, as Angela Davis, people have mentioned her a lot today, has suggested, the prison is a key component of the state's coercive apparatus, the overriding function of which is to ensure social control, then how can a feminism that seeks to end domination and resist oppression embrace the prison as a core strategy of eradicating violence? It simply cannot. Unless, again, the cognitive dissonance is so high. Or unless you're engaged in magical thinking to soothe your feelings. Because you feel it should exist, but you know it's bullshit, right? And I understand people want to feel a lot of things. You know, I always say like abolition is not about your fucking feelings, and then people really get upset at me about that. Yeah, because like you really want to be abolitionist, but you think Bill Cosby should die in prison, right? And people will hold on to that for the fucking rest of their lives. I'm an abolitionist. What? Harvey Weinstein should die under the prison. It's not possible. You either are an abolitionist, a PIC, or you're not. And I do want to say that not everybody has to be. No one is coercing you. We are not evangelists. There are no missionaries trying to recruit you. You can stay out, but you can't join and then make up your own fucking rules. There are people who have worked really hard to set some theoretical and political commitments that you gotta abide by if you're gonna join it. Yeah? And you gotta know the rules in order to be able to break them. And most people don't know the fucking rules. Okay, that's another little thing. So I'm gonna keep it moving to just say that again, we can't focus on addressing vulnerabilities and violence through criminalization, which is always racialized, always gendered, always heteronormed. A key question in 2020 must be, how can we create safety outside of carceral logic? This is where our attention and our organizing must focus. I'm going to end with a couple of comments that are provocations to those of you who are part of this UCLA community. I was supposed to be on my best behavior, and now it's not going to happen. Because I would like to ask us to reframe the idea of a mainstream approach to addressing gender-based violence. Those of us who practice transformative justice are sometimes painted as, quote, outside of the mainstream response to gendered violence. And this has frankly always been perplexing to me, because people who employ community-based responses to gendered violence are in fact the majority. This includes people who use community responses that are not particularly restorative or transformative. Somebody beats you up, you take a baseball bat, you go to their house, you knock their head in. That's also a community-based response to violence. Yeah? So we are actually the majority. I already cited the information about using the criminal punishment system to address violence. Most people reject it. What I have found over time is that it's much more illuminating to think of the funded responses versus those that are unfunded and under-resourced. So that's the dividing line. The mainstream response to gender-based violence is actually community-based, but it is also unfunded and under-resourced. The people who get all the money are the criminal punishment system to the tune of what? Almost $200 billion. And then some people in the nonprofit industrial complex that are under-resourced but still get funded. But grandma, who is addressing the problem at her table without involving anybody, is getting $0. So the line is not between, you can't wrap your brain around transformative justice and community accountability. That's my white guy voice. But that's what I'm saying. Do you know what I mean? Like, I say it all the time. People are like, I can't wrap my brain around. I'm like, how can you not fucking wrap your brain around it? You're living in this world. This is what everybody's doing. The difference is you all think about the funded landscape as the mainstream. And I reject that. So that's number one. Number two, this brings me to my second point, which is that CARE on this campus purports to be UCLA's institutionalized sexual violence resource. That's the non-carceral alternative for survivors of violence on this campus. Y'all know about CARE? Some of you? Most of you? All right, you know about it. Do you all know that this place currently has 2 advocates? 2? How many students are at UCLA? Huh? 30,000. Y'all have 2 advocates for 30,000 students? I was also told that those 2 advocates have to also deal with the faculty and the staff. All right. So if you didn't know that this was the case, my question is, why is that? All of you in this room are supposedly here because you care about sexual violence, right? And if you did know about it, why haven't you all flipped all the fucking tables over on this campus yet? No, I mean, like, how can and why is a space set up for a non-carceral response to violence? How can it be this under-resourced on a campus with this much money? And how can people who say they care about sexual violence be so goddamn acquiescent of that? I'm bringing this home to you here because it's our duty to take care of each other in our communities. And this, whether you like it or not, is your community. If you are going to school here, or you work here, this is part of your community. And so, where's the care for survivors on this community then? So I'm ending with a call to action that you all get to fucking flipping over some tables. And that you do it soon. And that the people who are working in that goddamn place shouldn't have been abandoned by all of you. They should not. One young woman of color. Where are all these young people of color on this campus? Where are they going to get support if they don't want to call the police or go to Title fucking 9? And we are all in this room. A lot of you call yourselves abolitionists. But you got to build up institutions and projects and spaces that will be non-carceral, that people can actually access. And why isn't that being built now, in this moment? Why aren't people up in arms in the Me Too moment? And why are you spending all your time thinking about things that are so far away from you when you have something in your backyard that could be fixed in a minute? And this speaks to me, at least, to how we operate in general in the world, and how we think everything has to have a big answer somewhere else, when in fact most things just have small answers where you are. And so that's really what I want to leave and end with. And I seriously hope that I do not come back here in 10 years and have just one advocate in that building. Seriously, because I won't be back, but 10 years from now I might. All right, thank you so much.